Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to do a more than a flick through, could be rules review and my opinion of DBA version 3 by Phil Barker and Sue Laflin-Barker. I know that these rule sets have been out for quite some time, but I recently purchased them. I read them and I was quite impressed. I realized that many rule sets are basing many mechanics in DBA, and it's a much easier read than DBMM. And I believe although it's quite simple, it's not simplistic, and there is a lot of strategy behind it, and a lot of things as a player you have to think during your deployment and subsequent game in order to achieve victory. So let's start. So here is version 3, and we have here the, I hope you can see, let's go a bit closer. So you have here obviously the introduction by the author explaining some basics of the game, and immediately you start with the rules. So let's go here and see how you start. You start with plain equipment, what you require obviously, army size and representation, ground scale, and then you go to one of the most interesting parts of the book, troop definition. Important differences with DBA 2.2 is you have fast and solid troops. It was something I was missing in DBA 2.2. You have fast and solid troops in spears, in blades, meaning that the lighter armed men-at-arms will be fast, and the heavier equipped will be solid. A nice distinction that was missing from the original DBA and DBA 2.2. Obviously DBMM is more complicated. So you have an explanation of the troops definition. You have the knights, you have your cavalry, you have light horse, scythe chariots, you have cavalry. You have your spears, you have your pikes, auxiliars, psiloi, bows, and warband. So you go here to basing and figures, where depending on the troop type, and it tells you also the list code for the army list, DBMM equivalent. Then you go here where you have base depth in larger figures, base depth in mm in smaller figures, in 15 mm's, and models per figure. So for example, pike solid, you have pike solid and pike fast, will be 4 in one base, or 3, so you know, fast are more open order. Explains to you in the DBM code what they are. They are pikes, superior, ordinary, inferior, and X. And this is here, for example, it's 20 to 30 mm depth in large scale, and 50 to 20 mm depth in the 15 mm. So there's a quite significant analysis of how you're going to base your figures, and then you go to battlefield and terrain. Explains to you the features, how you deploy them, how you put forts and camps, and what type of terrain. You have arable terrain, you have forest, because this has to do with your army lists and where your army's terrain is more, let's say, in comfort with. And then you go to fighting the battle. The rules start from page 10 and they finish in I think page 16, so it's basically 6 pages. So let's start here and have a look. It's talking about deployment, then you go sequence of play. We all know the sequence of play, where you roll the 4 pips, then you do the movement, then both shoot, then you do hand-to-hand combat. Now player initiative point dicing. Basically, it's very simple. It's not as complicated as the BMM. You need 1 or pip for a tactical move. You have only tactical moves. In some cases, you can do 2 tactical moves. If you are outside range of your commander, you need an extra personal initiative point, extra pip. If you're blocked by terrain feature, you need extras. So these are, but not at all complicated. The good thing is that the movement distances now, it's in base width, so the game becomes more universal. So for light horses, you have 4 base widths. So if your base width is 4 centimeters, 40 mm, you move 16. Knights move, mounted knights, elephants move 3 base width, 2 base width for solid troops, and 1 base width for any troops other than fast auxiliaries, so basically slower troops. Then it talks about crossing the river, interpenetrating troops. It's a very nice rule that is missing from many rule sets. It says who interpenetrates whom, and who can fall back through whom. It's very obvious that this should have happened in many rule sets. I think interpenetration was something that happened because when you are pushed back or when you're fleeing, you're not in ranks, so it would be easier to pass through or around your comrades. Then you have the threat zone, the zone of control, as we said, and move into contact with the enemy, all analyzed. So turning to face flank or rear contact. If you're attacked in the flank or rear, if you don't have an opponent front fighting, you just, after movement, you move, you turn and a free move and you face the flank attack. Distance shooting, again, you can shoot in units, can shoot in one target, but the other units, you have a main shooter and the others are just giving support, giving minus modifiers to the target. You have shooting from the rear, almost behind the rear edge, where your opponent has to turn 180 degrees and recoil facing the shooter. That's quite interesting rule. I like it. Close combat, again, every unit, every type of troop has a combat factor against foot and against mounted, and you roll 1d6 only, and you add this combat factor plus other factors that are missing from many games, like rare support factors, which units support what. So you have pikes who give a +3, a warband behind a warband gives a +1, and pikes add a +1 when in front of, but against different opponents. So against different opponents, you have different advantages, and that's obvious. Then you have flank supports. This is a new rule that was not in DBA 2.2. That means that, you have the flank support that gives a tactical factor of minus to your opponent when it's basically overlapped. Now with solid elements, for spears, for example, even if you're fighting and you are in the flanks, you give a +1 to your comrade beside you, again, depending on what type of troops you have. Here we have tactical factors. If a general is fighting, you get a +1. If he's shot at, again, you get a +1. Any overlapping elements give -1 to the opponent, and in rough ground, you get a -2. Unless you are bows or auxilia or warband, so heavy troops, solid troops, spears, get a -2 in difficult ground. And then you have the combat outcome. You know it if you recall, mostly you draw. Of course, there are some special rules that knights may be destroyed by blades, even if they draw. In close combat, and if they're solid, then you have the other option that you lose from your opponent, but you're more than half. Usually you recoil or you flee, except some exceptions. And then obviously if it's more than half, you're destroyed. So now recoiling and pushback elements. It's a very interesting rule, and a rule that I really like because it dictates your strategy. When you're recoiling and there are troops facing the same direction and there are troops that you can interpenetrate, you can fall back if there is space behind those troops, and then you have fresh troops covering your second ranks. Then otherwise you have to push back your opponent or push it back until you reach a position where it cannot be pushed more. If you cannot push back your opponent, you are destroyed. Again, depending on what support you give, and if you get support, the units are destroyed as well, or they just are not affected. Here you have fleeing and pursuing, quite simple rules of how you flee and how pursue, and how you winning the battle if you have a small army. If you lose 4 elements in DBA, 12 elements is an army. If you lose 4 elements, you lost, but there are some other circumstances, like if you lose a double base, it's count like 2 elements. If you lose a general, it could count as 2 elements, etc. Now we're talking about Big Battle DBA here. This is the one I'm interested, where you have basically, you're tripling everything you army lists, and you have 3 generals, and you can have allies. And of course, obviously, you have demoralized commands. And in the end, talking about campaigns, historical free fights, and giant DBA. So these are the rules. Very simple. What excites me about this is the diagrams. Now you have diagrams to understand how you place the terrains, how you measure, how you deploy, everything is much easier to understand. And most importantly, the diagrams of situations in battle, in movement, in group moves, in interpenetration, everything is there. Every diagram. And what I will do is, in the next video, I will use my armies and show you these diagrams and show you how situations are resolved. There is so many diagrams with situations that probably you would not be sure how to resolve, that are explained very clearly here. And it makes the game much more easier to understand. Always diagrams, in my opinion, are very important, about recoiling, about pushback, about pushbacks not being completed. What is how you turn and face if you're not unable to line up, and different situation of the same turn and face, or distant combat, or zone of control, anything you want. You see so many diagrams are here. And post-combat recoiling, how you recoil if you're flanked, and if you win the flanking unit. There's combat outcomes. There's so many diagrams that you will really understand the rules. Now you have the army list, explains to you how the army lists work. You have the home terrain, aggression factor, historical enemies, allied contingents, sources, troop definitions. Everything is here to explain to you how you can read the army list. And all this you see here are army lists. You have army list section 1, where is the chariot period 3000 BC to 500. This is I think this is section I. This is the section I2. Obviously, it's too many army lists. Here you have the classical period, and you have so on and so forth. You have so many army lists. You go up to early medieval period here. This section, as you can see, from 479 to 1071. And if you go a bit further on, you have the period that I'm interested in. Now you have here, for example, feudal Scots. You have the late medieval period, where I'm interested in, where you have the 100 Years' War armies, the Scottish armies for the Scottish Wars of Independence. Let's have a quick look. So, for example, here medieval French, and here 100 Years' War English. There is an explanation about the army, and has some historical battles. And then you go here and you see you have English 1332 to 1333, 1322 to 1333. You have English 1344 to 1414, English 1415 to 1422. And you have also your aggression number, the enemies, what enemies you have. And obviously, now for example, the English have 1 general. We'll make an army from the army list. We'll do it in the next video. 1 general, who can be a knight or a blade, 2 men-at-arms, 8 archers, who would be 4 longbowmen, 1 archer who is forged French town militia. So you have your army list, you have your opponents, you have your allies, and you can make army lists, your armies from here. So this is a flick through. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I gave you an idea how it looks. I am very impressed with the rules. I really like them. I found them, I don't know, 10 years later, but it's a 2014. This was released, so it's almost, excuse me, it's almost 8 years. But I think it's simple without being simplified, and it has a lot of thought behind it, and many things that other rules are missing. In the next video, I promise we will create an army from the army list, so you can see how it works, And all these very interesting examples, I will show them to you with my miniatures. I will put them on a table and we'll work on it one by one. I think this will help you all. Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed the flick through. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Have a great weekend, and bye-bye.